What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
On my birthday, there was nothing from my family, not a call, not a card, not even the lazy one-line text that people send when they are trying to look decent without lifting a finger. And the silence sat there in my phone like a confirmation of something I had known for years, but kept brushing aside because I did not want to be the daughter who admits her parents prefer the golden child and are comfortable pretending the other child is some self-running appliance that never breaks, never needs a tune-up and should keep humming in the corner while everyone praises the one who constantly stalls in the middle of the road. I told myself to keep busy, to let the day pass without turning it into a referendum on my worth. And I stayed away from calls and from the mirror and from that pit in the stomach that opens when you realize you are spending a day that is supposed to feel special managing other people's comfort. Yet the universe has a sense of humor, because habit pulled my thumb into a social platform, and the first thing in my feed was my brother grinning like a lottery winner next to a glossy new car, a caption typed with the confidence of a man who has never been told no and rarely been told wait, thanking our parents for the gift, and asking people to drop name suggestions for his baby, which is a word adults somehow use for machines when they want attention they did not earn. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, not because I envied the car, because I have learned to value the things I pay for and the quiet that comes with not owing anyone explanations, but because the timing felt like a confession they did not mean to make. A slip where the truth finally came out in public, the truth that if there is a hand to hold when he has a want, they will reach without thinking, and if there is a shoulder to lean on when I have a need, I will be told to stay strong and remember that life is not fair and that I should be proud of being independent, which sounds noble until you realize it is just code for handle your own pain, so we can keep applauding his mess. I could hear my mother's voice in my head saying that he needed extra help because he is still figuring things out, as if adulthood is a group project where some people do the work and others get the grade. And I could hear my father saying that boys and cars are a phase that passes, which is funny because the phase has lasted through high school, through college, through the year he moved home to reset, and through every debt he shrugged off until someone else quietly handled it, while my milestones were met with speeches about grit and self-reliance and what a blessing it is to be the dependable one who does not make trouble. Do you know what it feels like to be told you are strong so often that you realize it is not a compliment but an assignment, a permanent status you did not audition for, because it gives people permission to ignore you when you are hurting and to hand your share of comfort to the person who cries loudest and posts the most, and then to tell you that you should be proud of how well you are taking it. I scrolled through the comments congratulating him, watched as family friends praised my parents for being generous, and felt that familiar mix of anger and numbness. The push and pull where part of me wanted to type something cutting and part of me wanted to close the app and pretend it did not land on my birthday, and then another part of me, the part that has kept receipts in the back of a drawer for years, began stacking memories like files, the time I was told there was no money to help me relocate for a job while a surprise party was being planned for him with a weekend trip attached, the time I covered a medical bill alone and got a lecture about financial literacy while he financed another hobby with a loan that magically did not require his name on any paperwork, the time I bought my own used car and was told that pride comes from paying your way, and now here he was, posing with a car I could only have justified after saving for months, calling it a gift from the people who could not find 5 minutes to call their daughter and say happy birthday. I wish I could tell you I was above it, and that I smiled and closed the app and baked myself a cake with a positive attitude, but here is the truth I will say out loud because pretending is expensive. I felt humiliated in a way that made my hands shake. Not because of the car, but because of the message, the announcement to the world that generosity flows in one direction in our family and expectation flows in the other, and the person who is told she is strong is expected to clap while the person who is called special is expected to receive. So I did what strong people are never encouraged to do. I let myself sit in the anger long enough to hear what it was asking me to do, and it was not asking for a speech or a confrontation or a long negotiation where I explain the pattern and they pretend to understand it. It was asking for one clean act that would not be walked back the next time someone needed something from me and promise change if I could just be patient a little longer. I went through my phone and muted the family thread that had turned into a place where I learned news about them from photos rather than conversations, and then I opened the contacts and stared at the names that have always felt heavier than they look. And I pressed the option that said block, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I wanted to stop volunteering for pain that keeps showing up exactly on time. And then I moved over to the platform where the car photo lived and quietly removed myself from the circle that gives them a front row seat to my life, while I sit in the very back of theirs. While I was doing all of that, a little voice tried on its usual lines, the ones that tell me I am being dramatic or ungrateful or unfair, the ones that ask me to be the bigger person and call first and smooth it over. But the bigger person is not a fixed identity you live in like a uniform. The bigger person is a choice you make when there is mutual respect, and I did not see respect anywhere in sight. Only a machine that runs on my silence and calls it peace. I know how this sounds, like a tantrum dressed up as a boundary. Yet if you looked at the calendar and combined it with the caption and added in the years where my birthday was treated like a scheduling inconvenience, while his minor achievements were celebrated like national holidays, you might understand why. In that long minute after the post loaded, I felt something inside me stop pretending and start protecting, and once you hear that click you cannot unhear it, and once you feel that freedom you cannot unknow it. I did not announce it, I did not write a manifesto. I did not ask for votes. I just cut the cord in the only place that mattered, inside my own head first and then in the places where access used to be automatic, and I sat there in the quiet I created, feeling sadness roll through and then settle into something steadier, a kind of grounded calm that does not need their approval to stand. Which is when I realized the gift I gave myself that day was not a thing you can pose with, it was the right to stop auditioning for a role I never wanted. If you are wondering whether I felt guilty after, of course I did, because guilt is the tax you pay when you were raised to believe that love is earned by endurance, and that endurance looks noble on women. But the guilt did not stay long, not this time. Because every time I replayed that caption the same sentence returned, and it was simple and merciless. If they can remember how to be generous to him on my birthday, they can remember how to reach me when it matters, and if they cannot, I can remember how to reach myself, which is exactly what I did. I wish I could tell you the universe let me enjoy my peace for a while, that my phone stayed quiet and my calendar stayed clear, yet life loves a test right after you make a decision, and while I did not know it that night, the decision I made was going to be measured sooner than I expected. Because the silence I chose was about to be interrupted by someone who had never knocked without a script ready, and the question she carried would not be small, and I would have to decide whether my boundary was real or just a mood, and that is where I will leave you. Because in 2 short days there was a hand on my door and the tears were already part of the plan, and I was about to find out what it costs to finally say no and mean it. The morning after I pulled the plug on every channel that funnels me back into the same old script, I woke up with that small panic that hits when you change a habit you have lived inside for years, the one that tells you to undo it before anyone notices. And I lay there arguing with the part of me that loves peace even when peace costs me my dignity. Then I reached for my phone and saw exactly what I needed to see, which was nothing, no missed calls, no texts, no messages slipped under the door of my conscience, just clean quiet that felt less like emptiness and more like the first clear page in a notebook I paid for myself. I had told myself the night before that if I was going to do this, I would do it like an adult and not like an exploding firework. So instead of writing a long monologue to the family chat that would be screenshotted, dissected, and archived as proof I am difficult, I opened the boring parts of my life and began cutting the tiny cords nobody ever thanks you for holding, the streaming account that somehow migrated to my parents' living room because my brother forgot his password again, the cloud photo album I pay for where every holiday picture lands, even if I am not in the room, the automatic renewals on the services my mother calls mine because I set them up, which is technically true in the way that saying I am tall because I bought a step stool is true, and with each cancellation I felt a click, a small return of something that had been borrowed. For so long I forgot the shape of it. There was a raft of other cords I had to name before I could cut them, which is harder than people think because the cords hide under words like helpful and practical and family. So I sat at the kitchen table and made a list that was less about money and more about energy. The sick day pickups I always handled because my parents were busy and my brother could not miss a workout. The holiday travel plans I arranged because my mother hates comparing fares. The reservation deposits I put down because my father prefers someone else's credit card on file, and right there in the middle of that list I saw the ugliest thread of all, the way I had become the project manager of a family that never put me on the project. And I decided I would return every responsibility back to the original owners without making a speech about fairness or gratitude, because I do not need their agreement to stop doing volunteer work that keeps me invisible. I know some people think revenge only counts when it leaves a mark that shows on skin or in bank accounts, but the most satisfying blow I landed that day happened quietly when I opened my work portal and swapped out my emergency contacts. Because nothing says you are done performing daughterhood on request like removing the people who learned to reach you only when they want something from the path they take to get it, and I added the 2 friends who have shown up in ways that do not photograph well, but save lives. All the same, and then, because pettiness can be healthy when it is clean and targeted, I sent a single money request to my parents labeled with a polite note that read birthday dinner fund, a number so small it could never be called a bill. A nudge visible enough to make a point without starting a war, and when the request sat there untouched for the rest of the day, that told me more than any speech could have. The quiet kept breaking in small ways, a cousin from out of state sending a message that said your brother is over the moon and our parents are so proud. A relic from childhood forwarding me the car photo with 10 exclamation points and a line about how lucky some people are, and I typed and erased the same sentence a dozen times, the one where I would say that luck looks different when it wears your effort as a disguise. Then I put the phone face down and went back to my list because lists do not argue with you. They just prove things, and mine proved that I had been making their lives easier in ways that made mine smaller, and that the only way to stop was to stop. At some point in the afternoon, I caught myself rehearsing a conversation with my mother, the one where she would cry and say she did not know I felt left out, and I would reply with all the careful examples I have carried like glass in my pockets. And then I heard how defensive I sounded even in my own head and realized I was building a courtroom I did not need, because I am not trying to win a case anymore. I am trying to leave a building that keeps catching fire and calling me a hero for showing up with a bucket. So I closed the imaginary door and returned to the present, which felt lighter than any holiday dinner I have ever survived. The second day brought a different flavor of quiet, not the surprised hush that falls when you first pull your energy out of a room, but the steadier hush that follows when nobody has noticed yet, and I will not lie, a small part of me flashed between relief and fury. Relief because I did not have to soothe anyone who is suddenly uncomfortable. Fury because it confirmed the math I have avoided, the calculation where my absence registers only when I am needed for a task, not when I am missing as a person. And that flare of anger finally burned up the last thin thread that kept me tempted to send a softening text, and in its place I felt something I had not felt since the year I moved out on my own and bought my first piece of furniture with cash, which was the simple pride of owning my choices without asking for a family receipt. When the knock finally came, it did not surprise me, because guilt travels on a different timetable than love, and it always arrives loud, and before I even reached the door I knew who it was and what story she would try to tell. The one where I am the strong one who knows better, and my brother is the delicate one who needs more help, and my father is the practical one who hates drama, and I stood there with my hand on the lock and made one last small decision in a week of large ones, which was that if she was going to enter my life again, she was going to meet the version of me who does not hand over her voice as the price of admission. And I turned the deadbolt slowly enough to feel every inch of it, because sometimes the best revenge is not a line you deliver, it is the person you refuse to become when tears and excuses show up at your door. When I opened the door just wide enough to see her face without inviting the whole performance into my living room, she started with the line I knew was coming. The drawn-out why that always arrives dressed as concern, but carries the usual accusation that I am the problem for refusing to be quiet, and I stood there with the lock still set and told her that if we were going to speak, we would do it without the usual script, without the part where she pretends confusion, and I carry the burden of making her feel better about choices she keeps calling necessary, And I watched the tears gather because she knows tears are our family's fire alarm, and I am the one who usually runs for the extinguisher. Yet I did not move because I am done putting out fires I did not start. She said she had no idea what I was talking about, that I was being unfair, that she loves me and my brother equally, that this sudden wall came out of nowhere and felt cruel, and I answered in a voice that surprised both of us, because it was steady and calm and not interested in winning. I said the wall is not sudden and it is not cruel. It is a boundary built out of years where I was told to be the strong one while Evan was told to be the one who needs things. And if she wants to understand why the boundary is here, she can start by remembering my birthday and the car photo that landed like a confession, and the way her silence wrapped around that confession like approval. She reached for the oldest tool in her belt and tried to barter with history. She reminded me of times she says we helped me, the semester I lived at home and paid rent to keep the peace, the holiday dinners where I showed up with a side dish and got a compliment about how dependable I am, the weekend she watched my dog while I covered an emergency shift. And I told her that listing errands and favors is not the same as showing up for your child when it counts, that real care is not measured in casseroles and temporary convenience. It is measured in whether you can see the person in front of you without filtering everything through the comfort of the person who shouts loudest. And she knew exactly who I meant because she tried to pivot to the same story about how Evan just needs extra help until he gets on his feet, as if his feet have not been resting on a cushion we financed for years. She asked me to please let her in because people were looking and she hates scenes, which would have been funny if I had not lived through so many quiet scenes at tables where I swallowed truth to keep everyone's plates balanced. And I told her we could talk on the threshold where things are plain and where I can hear myself think, and I made it simple enough for anyone to follow by saying that if she wanted to understand my decision, she would have to drop the lines about me being strong and him being fragile. She would have to stop pretending that the car was some harmless gift with bad timing, and she would have to admit that not calling me while celebrating him was not an oversight, it was a choice. She tried to hug me because hugs have solved a lot in our family. They are the reset button that lets people skip accountability and jump straight to the smiling group photo. And I stepped back slowly and told her that affection without truth is another way to tell me to put my feelings in the trunk and smile for the camera, and I am not taking another ride in that car, not now, not again. Not after years of being told that my independence is a privilege while his dependence is a family project. And she flinched because she heard the word project and finally understood that I had named the thing she has spent years not naming. She asked what I wanted, and for a second I almost said I wanted an apology. I wanted a call that arrived on time without prompting. I wanted a single day where I did not have to interpret silence like a puzzle. But I know apologies in our house come wrapped in excuses, and I am not auditioning for that gift anymore, so I said I wanted honesty. I wanted the record to reflect what has been happening, and I wanted any future contact to be built on something more durable than my ability to eat disappointment and call it maturity. And when she opened her mouth to protest, I told her we were going to slow down and put the facts in the same room, because if she was truly confused, then clarity would be a kindness. That was the moment I used the only kind of revenge that feels clean to me now, the kind that refuses to yell but refuses to forget. Because I reached behind the door and pulled out a plain envelope I had prepared after a long night of memory and a slow scroll through years of messages and posts and small asks that turned into permanent expectations. And I placed it in her hands and told her that inside was a simple record of the things I have been told and the things he has been given, not to humiliate her but to stop pretending, and I said she could read it at home and come back when she was ready to talk without reaching for the usual script, and I closed the door to a polite width that said the conversation was over for today unless it could begin again as something new. She stared at the envelope like it was heavier than it looked and whispered my name the way people say please without using the word, and I held her eyes long enough to make sure she saw that I was not angry so much as finished, which is a different kind of power than we are used to in this family. And as she stepped back, I told her that when she was ready for the truth, she should bring honesty and leave the tears outside, because I have spent enough years drying them while my own went unnoticed, and I will give you this because you asked why. I am done being the story's background, and I am ready to become the narrator who decides what gets cut and what stays in, and if you want to hear why in full, you will have to open the envelope. Which is exactly where we will start. Next. She came back the next evening with the envelope folded and softened at the corners the way paper looks when someone has read and reread and still hopes a new sentence will appear if they stare long enough. And before she even spoke, I could see the tug of war behind her eyes between the reflex to defend every choice as practical and the dawning awareness that practicality is just the family word for comfort when the cost is hidden in my silence. So I let her in, not because I was ready to make peace, but because I wanted the record to be read aloud in the same room where I have been asked for patience 1,000 times, and I placed the envelope back on the table and told her that if we were going to talk, we would do it slowly and clearly. Without the old shortcuts and without the usual parade of excuses dressed as love. She said the documents were one-sided, that screenshots are cold, and that context matters, and I agreed that context matters, which is why I had printed more than messages. I had included dates and bank statements and calendar entries, and even the little digital receipts that show which card covered which expense and on what day. And I watched her face change when she found the page that listed the year I quietly paid off Evan's first emergency loan to keep a collector from calling the house, a debt I was told did not exist, and a crisis I was told I had invented out of jealousy. And she touched that line with her fingertip the way a person checks if a stove is still hot, and then she flipped to the page that held my relocation text where I asked for a small bridge and got a speech about resilience. And then the printout of the happy post from this week where the message was not just that he got a car, but that our parents bought it and that they were proud enough to broadcast it on the day I got nothing. Not a call, not a card. Not even the lazy one-line message that takes less time than the caption on his photo. I told her I did not compile the record to humiliate her or to keep score like a petty accountant. I did it because my memory has been gaslit so often that I needed a simple, unemotional ledger. And I needed her to sit with a version of our life that does not bend to the family story about the strong daughter and the fragile son. And when she started to say he just needed help, I asked her to count how many times help arrived for him as cash or gifts or free passes, and how many times help arrived for me as a lecture about independence, and I asked her to notice that even the compliments I receive are assignments in disguise, instructions to keep absorbing impact so the rest of you can pretend the road is smooth. She tried to pivot to feelings, to say she is hurt, that I think she does not love me, and I said love that cannot say its own choices out loud is not love that I can keep living with. And I told her that for any conversation to continue, she would have to put the truth on the table in plain words, not the careful phrases about different kids needing different things, and not the soft focused talk about family seasons, but the sharp sentence that names what has been happening. That opportunities and grace and money and time have flowed in one direction, while responsibility and silence and praise for endurance have flowed in the other. And that when you add it up over years, it builds a house you expect me to live in with a smile while my brother rotates between rooms. She asked, almost pleading, what she could do to fix it, and the part of me that has lived on crumbs for a long time wanted to offer a list that could be completed in an afternoon so we could all pretend the ledger has been balanced, but the other part of me, the part that is tired of being the repair crew, said we are beyond fixes and into terms, and I laid them out in a voice that did not shake. I said there would be no more small taps on my resources disguised as family errands, no more automatic access to my accounts or subscriptions or discount bundles, no more emergency contacts that turn me into the default firefighter, and that she would receive notice of those changes not as threats, but as completed actions. Because I had already filed the forms to remove Evan as an authorized user from the card he used to lean on, I had already closed the shared cloud and streaming channels that I paid for, and that kept the family tethered to my wallet. And I had already updated the documents at work that used to route every problem to me first, which means the next call he makes when something breaks will not go to the person you call strong. It will go to the people who just bought him a car. She said that would make his life harder, and I said that was the point, not to punish, but to give him the dignity of consequence. And when she whispered that he will take it badly, I told her that adults often do when the free ride ends. And then I placed a second envelope on the table, thinner but heavier in meaning, a simple letter addressed to our family group stating that I am stepping down from unpaid coordinator and that any requests for my time or money must be written, clear, and reciprocal. And that I will not pick up the phone for crying or for vague emergencies without specifics. And I explained that I had not sent it yet because I wanted to give her one chance to speak the truth before I made the boundary visible to the only audience that has ever mattered in our house, the one that believes. Silence equals agreement. She asked me not to send it, she begged me to think about how it would look, and I told her she was finally asking the right question because how it looks is exactly the point, since for years I have been asked to protect appearances while you protected his comfort. And the cleanest revenge I have left is to stop laundering the story while you deposit your choices into my account. So yes, how it looks will change, and if that makes you uncomfortable then consider it a fair trade for the years I was asked to swallow mine, and when she went quiet I understood she had reached the place where the script ends and the truth would have to begin if anything was going to move. I leaned in and said the sentence I have never said out loud because saying it means the daydream dies and the hard work of change begins. I told her that I am not the family's safety net anymore, that I am done cushioning the fall for a grown man while being told to be grateful for my resilience, and that if she wants to keep me in her life, she will have to learn a new way to love me, one that does not cost me my self-respect. And I watched the words land and freeze her in place, because for the first time in a very long time she understood that the next move would be hers, and that I would not be there to make it easier. The morning after she sat at my table and stared at the proof until the old explanations stopped sounding like love and started sounding like habit, I watched the messages stack up in the muted family thread where nothing lands until I decide to look. And I took my time because speed has always been their advantage and patience is mine. Then I opened the thread and read my mother's attempt at a gentle rewrite, a paragraph about misunderstandings and missed signals that never once used the words I had asked for, while my brother, who cannot resist a crowd even when it is only family, typed a breezy note about how I am being dramatic and how he never asked for anything and how a gift is a gift and people should be happy for each other. And that was the exact moment I realized my final move would not be an argument or a speech, but a set of simple, irreversible actions that make the story honest whether they like it or not. I took the thin envelope I had prepared, the one that announces my resignation from the unpaid role I have carried like a full-time job with no benefits, and I sent it to the group with a calm line that said I would not be discussing feelings until the facts were acknowledged, and while the typing bubbles tried to form a net under me, I executed the part of the plan that hurts without cruelty and teaches without theater, which began with closing the family cell plan I opened years ago as a favor that became a structure, moving my number to a solo account and issuing a formal notice to the carrier that any remaining lines would either migrate or terminate within the grace window, then confirming that the cloud storage, streaming bundles, travel points, and subscription logins I had managed in silence were now shut or transferred, not to punish anyone but to return responsibility to its rightful owners, followed by the clean satisfaction of removing the last authorized user ties on the credit card that has carried more of his emergencies than I care to count, and, because unfinished chores keep families bonded in the worst way, I sent a certified letter about the storage unit that has held Evan's boxes and hobbies under my name for longer than anyone will admit. A polite notice that the unit would be cleared in 30 days and that unclaimed contents would be donated or sold to cover fees, with receipts to follow, because I am done curating his life while mine is expected to run on fumes. Predictably, he called, then called again, then tried video because he believes pressure is the same thing as urgency. And I let every attempt slide into voicemail because if a person wants to speak to the adult version of me, then they will learn to use adult words in a form that can be saved. And when his texts took the tone of a wounded prince who is sure the kingdom exists to fix his inconveniences, I replied with a single long message that laid out the timeline, the new terms, and the only door available to him, which is the one that leads through ownership, repayment plans for the balances I covered, proof of insurance and registration that do not ride on my discounts, and, above all, a written acknowledgement of the pattern we both know by heart. And I told him that sneering at boundaries is a luxury paid for by someone else and that budget has closed. My father, who prefers to stay above conflict by pretending to be allergic to it, finally stepped in with a note about keeping the peace and remembering we are family, and I answered him with the calm truth I have been practicing in private. That peace without fairness is just quiet control, and that family, if it means anything, must be able to look at itself without blinking, and that I will meet anyone halfway who can say the hard sentence out loud, the one that admits they made choices that cost me while benefiting him, and that they did it because it was easy, not because it was right, and if they can say that, then we can talk about therapy and repair and a future that does not require my silence as a down payment. By the end of the week, the practical consequences began to do what words never did, because the phone lines came due and the storage lock clicked open for the last time, and the bank confirmed the authorized access was gone, and my mother, who understands bills better than she understands boundaries, wrote to say she wished we could have worked this out privately, and I replied that we did try, for years, in a way that left me paying in private while everyone else enjoyed the public version, and that I am not ashamed of needing fairness the way other people need applause, and that I am not angry anymore. I am finished, which is not a threat, it is a new standard. On the 31st day from the car post that started all of this, a detail that no one will see on social feeds, but that I will remember because it marks the first month I lived like my own caretaker, a final message slid into the family thread from my mother. A short sentence with no spin that said she understands what she did, and that she is sorry, and that she will stop cushioning him with my life. And I believed her enough to answer with terms, not with a hug, because the story changes only when the terms change, and I offered a path that included repayment for what matters, counseling with a mediator who does not take sides, and a moratorium on gifts that exceed what they refused me, and I said that until those steps begin, the door stays closed but not locked, and that I am at peace either way. That night I sat in a quiet I chose and realized the sweetest revenge was not clearing a unit or closing a plan or watching a grown man learn what an adult bill feels like. It was the simple victory of no longer begging to be seen by people who taught me to clap for my own erasure, and when I finally slept, I did it without the old bargaining prayers that promise I will be easier if they will be kinder. Because the truth is set now and it is not going back in the drawer, and if you want the last line, then take this one. The family they preferred does not exist for me anymore, and the one I built for myself does, and that, after all the noise and all the years, is the win I am keeping.